Galerians is a third-person survival horror game where you play as Rion, a 14-year-old boy with psychic powers who escapes a hospital after a familiar voice calls for his help. The game is available on PlayStation 1.
I sometimes have a frightening dream.
Atmosphere. The game's environments vary little in feel, but quite a lot in their aesthetics. Nearly every location you visit feels empty and eerie. Places like the hospital have a cold, alien look that makes it resemble more of a prison than a hospital, with giant metallic doors and security gates.
Well, it looks like the rabbit's out of his cage. Return to your room, and you won't get hurt.
Rion's home feels strange and unwelcoming somehow, but there's also the sensation that you aren't alone in its many rooms. The apartment complex is haunting in the way that it comes across as a crowded building, and you see a lot of people in the place, but still it feels empty. The game's 90s vibe and retrofuturism really makes some of the environments look surreal and abstract, along with the downward-facing camera angles that make Rion seem small. The game's cutscenes are sometimes very dreamlike, with things overlapping and odd noises playing through them like he's imagining the events unfolding before him, but what makes a lot of the atmosphere make sense is how Rion doesn't remember any of the places he visits. Everything is foreign to him, even his own home, which really adds another layer to how alien nearly every environment feels. The overarching feeling is that of a strange, surreal eeriness that's brought about by the themes and aesthetics. It feels like the future of liminal spaces, with all these futuristic places that already feel dated and abandoned. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The game's scares boil down to random noises and the combat. The combat itself is often more frustrating than frightening, but setting people on fire and throwing them about is still satisfying, even if it's a bit morbid. The game's sound effects are often loud and sometimes come out of nowhere, and it's enough to startle the player since the rest of the game is usually eerily quiet. Some of the antagonist designs are a little haunting, but really there's very few frightening things in the game, and it doesn't venture out into anything much. That's still on Harry Mason. Sound design. The game's soundtrack varies from high-speed industrial music to slow and creepy 90s ambient, whirring noises punctuated by more deep synth and scraping noises. There's a lot of strange stuff in there too, with electronic and experimental pieces to give an unearthly feel to the game, but most of it is just an unsettling silence. There's reverb for the footsteps in every room, and outdoor ambiance is pretty good for the time. The voice acting has a few bad spots, but it's mostly very good. Even when characters have a lot of dialogue to read out in a single cutscene, it stands head and shoulders above a lot of the games of the time. The sound effects, as stated before, are pretty loud, but many of them are seemingly stock effects or just generic noises. The menu sounds are sort of spooky, but that's about it. Overall, the sound design doesn't do anything special, but the music really goes a long way into making the game feel as weird as it is. That's 2 Harry Masons. Gore. Defeating enemies with some of Rion's powers results in blood puddles on the ground and burnt corpses, but it's not really anything special. On the other hand, the game has quite a few gory scenes, and through the PlayStation graphics and framing of the scenes, they're very standout moments of bizarre and almost artistic brutality. The game is quite long, but of all the things you'll remember after it, it'll more than likely be the gore. That's 3 Harry Masons.
Heart rate normal. Administer the Nalcon.
Won't that destroy his brain cells and prove fatal?
It might, but we must follow the clinic chief's orders.
Okay then.
Rion! Rion!
Who are you?
They're coming. They're coming to get me.
Why are you calling me?
I'm scared.
I've never heard of such a quick dosage cycle.
Me too. I'm afraid it may have destroyed the patient's memory. I'm surprised he's even still alive.
I'll go check the data.
Story. After receiving an experimental injection, Rion's memory is erased, and he has to rebuild what he knows to save the voice that keeps calling out to him. The story of Galerians is dark and complicated, dealing with child abuse and religious themes. An artificial intelligence threatens to replace humanity with loyal subjects of its own, and Rion and the voice calling him are the only ones that can stop or prevent it from going too far. Along the way, you'll end up meeting a lot of interesting and memorable characters that are either sympathetic in their forced creation, or of their own problems with the self. There's a suffering that's going on in the background of Galerians that's almost overbearing, but never presented on screen. There's a few diary entries, but mainly the story tends to present itself mostly in cutscenes, and sometimes they really put large info dumps in them, but other times the story is quite organic, and things like Rion's sensibility makes it natural to interact with an object and recall the lost memories about it. Again, with the current AI trend, stories like the ones presented in Galerians do end up cutting a little deeper, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Galerians is a creepy game that presents a dark story that's aging in an unsettlingly prophetic way. It has its problems with random difficulty spikes, but generally, it's an interesting game. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I overcharged a lot of the guards, I do not feel bad about it and advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Now let's go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.